clash that would reinvigorate the warrior spirit of his people, and found it in the place of Romulus's birth. A cattle raiding dispute along the border between Rome and Alba led to mutual recriminations, and for Tullus this was enough of a pretext, and war was declared. He even managed to arrange things so that the Romans looked like the aggrieved party who were being dragged against their will into battle. Armies from both sides advanced on one another, but before the order for full-scale engagement was given, Medius, the leader of the Albans, approached Tullus with an unusual proposal. There was nothing to be gained, the Albans said, in a bloody struggle between two familial people, when the Etruscans sat at both their doorsteps, eagerly awaiting any opportunity to invade. A fight between Alba and Rome would deplete the strength of both victor and vanquished, leaving the door wide open for the Etruscans to make them all slaves. Medius proposed that single combat should decide their quarrel. That way their respective armies could still keep the ambitious Etruscans in check. Tullus agreed reluctantly, seeing the logic of Medius's argument, though it would not be single combat per se that would decide things. Each army's ranks held 3 brothers, triplets, who were chosen to fight for the fate of their people. Alban Curiati is an episode, like the rape of the Sabine women, that has found its way into countless works of art and literature, most famously in the Oath of the Herati by Jacques-Louis David, that great lover of antiquity. In front of the opposing armies, the 2 sets of brothers squared off. The fight was furious, and in quick succession 2 of the Romans lay dead. Horatius, the remaining brother, knowing he could not take all 3 of his enemies at once, ran up a nearby hill, forcing the 3 Curiati to chase him. As the first neared, Horatius turned abruptly and killed him. The second Alban brother arrived too late to help, and Horatius fought and killed him as well. The third Curiati, weary from the chase and from wounds sustained in the earlier fight, was no match at all upon arrival. He fell to his knees, and Horatius did not fight him so much as execute him, plunging his sword down the poor bastard's throat. The Romans cheered their victory, and the Albans, grumbling at Medius's deal, were forced to withdraw and supplicate themselves to Roman rule. But Medius, aware of how precarious his authority was in the aftermath of this non-defeat to Rome, conspired to release his people from subjugation. He induced Veii, the nearest Etruscan city and, as we will later see, an important early rival of Rome, to attack the Romans. The Albans, Medius said, would be called upon to aid Rome, and he promised that at a decisive moment in the battle, the Albans would desert, leaving the Roman flank unguarded. Veii jumped at the opportunity to crush Rome and attacked immediately. Just as Medius predicted, Tullus called upon the Albans to join the fight, and the armies gathered to do battle. Just as the fight was about to begin, Medius ordered the Albans to withdraw. The Roman soldiers were shocked to see their ally suddenly leaving, but Tullus, thinking quickly, addressed his troops, telling them that it was his plan for the Albans to sneak around behind the enemy. The Romans, heartened, marched into battle with confidence and defeated the Veiites. Back in camp, however, Tullus ordered the arrest of Medius and had him brought before the Roman troops. Tullus then revealed the treachery of the Alban leader and, to the horror of his men, passed, without trial, a sentence of death by dismemberment. Their leader dead, Tullus then ordered the destruction of Alba Longa itself. He ordered the city destroyed and the citizens relocated to Rome, where they would become Romans, forever wiping Alba from the map. Tullus reigned 32 years and died in 642 BC. The return to arms was his lasting legacy, and the incorporation of the Albans was his most important contribution to the growth of the city. Henceforth, Rome's neighbors returned to their view of the city as little more than an armed camp, and worked tirelessly to defeat the Roman menace. Never again would Rome enjoy an extended period of uninterrupted peace, despite the efforts made by Tullus's successor, Ancus Marcius, the grandson of Numa, to bring the population back to his grandfather's vision of peace. Less is known, or told, about Ancus than any of his predecessors, but we do know that he attempted to follow in the footsteps of his grandfathers, but with far less success. Events conspired to force war upon him, and despite his natural proclivities, he accepted his fate and led the Romans into battle. A confederation of Latin communities who chafed under Roman dominance took Ancus's succession as the perfect opportunity to attack, believing they had another Numa on their hands who would be an easy mark. But Ancus accepted the challenge, and the Roman forces, battle-tested by their years under Tullus, routed each in turn. The defeated inhabitants were forced, like the Albans, to abandon their homes and settle in Rome, while Romans were sent to settle the vacated towns. Through this policy, the population of the city swelled, and the surrounding countryside was filled with subjects loyal to Rome. At the outset of the fight with the Latins, Ancus made his most important contribution to Roman society. Dissatisfied with the haphazard way war began between Rome and her enemies, he decided to inject a sacred ritual, introducing something of pneuma into the barbarism of armed conflict. A specific formula was proscribed as to how exactly the Romans would declare war on an enemy. Too tedious to spell out here, but it involved sending envoys into enemy territory, announcing the war to the first man met in an official pronouncement, making more official declarations at appointed times, waiting 33 days, and finally throwing a spear into enemy territory, signaling the beginning of hostilities. The entire process may seem a bit overwrought, but it demonstrates the Roman desire to infuse all aspects of life with the rule of law, even if the end result was savage bloodshed. After the campaign against the Latins, Ancus won an important victory against the Veites, gaining control of the Maetian forest and extending Roman territory all the way to the sea. The consequences of this event cannot be overstated. Through Ostia, the port town founded by Ancus at the mouth of the Tiber, all initial Roman forays into the Mediterranean were launched and received. Ancus reigned 24 years and died in 617 BC. At his death, Rome found itself immeasurably strengthened by the addition of countless new citizens, a neighborhood free of enemies, and a port to call its very own. We will leave the story here and pick up next time with the final three kings, the Tarquin dynasty, the last of which would show himself to be such a tyrant that the very idea of monarchy would be hateful to Romans forever after, even forcing the emperors to semantically cloak their activities so as not to be accused of monarchism. As I said earlier, the lives of these kings are apocryphal biographies designed to explain the origin and development of Rome to later Romans. What is mostly being fleshed out in the story of these first kings is the relationship between the two most important pillars of Roman society, war and religion. The warlike Romulus is followed by the religious Numa, who is followed by the warlike Tullus, until finally the two pillars are joined in Ancus, the religious king who is dragged into battle by fate. This interplay is instructive and offers a neat encapsulation of their character. The Romans are a warlike people, tempered by religion, not a religious people forged into warriors. Ultimately, it is war, not prayer, that defines the Romans. Imagine if it had been the opposite, a people founded by a religious pacifist and succeeded by a warrior, who was then succeeded by a pacifist, who was then succeeded by a warrior, dragged by fate into a religious life. It paints a very different picture. The Romans are fighters through and through, though Machiavelli's point is well taken. Without religious tempering, it is doubtful the Romans could have sustained a republic based upon the rule of law, and would have remained an unremarkable tribe of violent barbarians. To sum up, the Romans were soldiers who took oaths seriously, not priests who took swords. Join me next time as we discuss the last days of the Roman monarchy and what was so bad about Tarquinius Superbus, the last king of Rome, that led the city to transform itself into a republic that lasted for 500 years. Hello, and welcome to the History of Rome. So far, we have covered 4 of the 7 kings of Rome: Romulus, Numa Pompilius, Tullus Hostilius, and Ancus Marcius. Today we will discuss the final 3, the so-called Tarquin dynasty, the father of Tarquinius Priscus, a decent if manipulative king, his adopted son and successor Servius Tullius, and finally his real son Tarquinius Superbus, who usurped his adopted brother and was then himself usurped by a fed-up mob, marking him forever with the infamy of being the last king of Rome. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus was born in Tarquini, one of the 12 cities of Etruria, the son of a Corinthian exile named Demaratus. Tarquin, the name by which history remembers him, was a shrewd businessman who became wealthy, but due to his racially mixed heritage, he was only admitted so far up the Etruscan social and political ladder. Angered at being denied the respect he felt he deserved, he decided to move to Rome, a city famous for offering men a fresh start. In Rome, Tarquin made an immediate splash. He gave lavishly, funding public projects, charities, and anything else that would bring him renown. It did not take long for Tarquin to come to the attention of Ancus Marcius, the aging king. In his final years, Ancus brought Tarquin into his confidence, leading to a close relationship that resulted in Tarquin ultimately being made guardian of Ancus's 2 sons when the king died. Tarquin knew an opportunity when he saw it, and after Ancus died, he sent the 2 boys away on a hunting trip. He then lobbied the Senate to hold elections for a new king immediately to avoid any possible threat to the city brought on by the vacuum in leadership. Tarquin had made a lot of friends in the short time he had been in Rome, and his further generosity no doubt convinced any fence-sitters that he was the man for the job. He was selected in a landslide and became the 5th king of Rome. One of his first acts, demonstrating his characteristic shrewdness, was to expand the Senate by another 100 men, bringing their total number to 300. The new senators were wholly obligated to Tarquin for their positions and, predictably, supported him in everything that he did, leaving the Senate little more than a rubber stamp for Tarquin's policies. This could have proven disastrous if Tarquin had been an incompetent or tyrannical leader, but he proved to be a conscientious and able king, both as an administrator and military commander. Soon after his election, Rome found itself at war, again, with some of its Latin neighbors. Tarquin easily routed his opponents and returned to Rome with a great deal of plunder. He decided to celebrate his victory by throwing public games, the likes of which had never been seen. But there was no stadium large enough for Tarquin's vision, so he ordered a hippodrome built between the Palatine and Aventine hills. This hippodrome, when completed, would become known as the Circus Maximus, one of the greatest sports venues in the ancient world. It would remain in continuous use for the 1,000-year existence of the empire. Immediately after work began on the Circus Maximus, Rome found itself embroiled in a fight with the remaining independent Sabine communities. They had never gotten over having half their population annexed by the Romans and now sought to challenge the upstart for control of the region. Tarquin again led the Romans to victory, defeating the Sabines with strategy as well as brute force. Destroying a bridge the Sabines had used to cross into Roman territory, cutting off any escape route, he then smashed them against the river. To celebrate this victory, Tarquin inaugurated one of the most famous of all Roman traditions, the Triumph. Later years would set guidelines for what constituted an official triumph, but the basic parts were put in place by Tarquin. The leader of the victorious army rides into the city on a chariot drawn by 4 horses. The legions follow with prisoners of the vanquished army and all manner of plunder seized from the enemy. To be awarded a triumph was the greatest honor a Roman general could receive. More will be said later about the traditional elements of a triumph, so for now we will simply note for trivia's sake that it was Tarquinius Priscus who celebrated the first one. Right around this time, a fantastic story reached the king. The head of a slave's sleeping child had suddenly burst into flames, though the child remained unhurt and did not wake up. Witnesses testified that they had seen the event with their own eyes, and that the flames only disappeared when the child awoke. Tarquin's wife believed it was an omen of the child's future greatness, and implored the king to adopt him so as to invite destiny into their house and not have it break down their doors. Tarquin agreed, and the child, Servius Tullius, was adopted by the king. He raised the boy as his own, and the omen bore out as the boy grew into a capable leader and eventual heir apparent to the throne. All was progressing nicely for Tarquin, but trouble was brewing. The sons of Ancus had not forgotten how Tarquin denied them their birthright, and resolved to reclaim what they felt was theirs. Knowing they could never get close to the king, the brothers enticed 2 men to do their dirty work for them. The 2 men arrived at the palace and pretended to have a loud quarrel, eventually demanding the king settle their dispute. Tarquin came to see what all the commotion was about and agreed to settle the fight. But as he sat to adjudicate, one of the men pulled out an axe he had hidden in his robe and lodged it in the back of the king's head. Tarquin fell, and the 2 men attempted to escape, but they were immediately captured. Tarquin's wife, Tanaquil, seeing the severity of the wound, immediately cleared the room and brought Servius Tullus